Hi there. Please welcome Laura Crawley now to episode 7 of Beyond Autism View. You're very welcome, Laura.
Thanks so
Uh,
much for having me, Stephen.
Thanks for taking the time out of your day now. So we'll start with the first question now. First bit, can you tell everyone a wee bit about yourself?
So my name is Laura Crowley. I am an autistic autism consultant, a sleep consultant, particularly for additional needs kids. I'm a trainer, a speaker, and I'm based in Cork in Ireland. I've worked in autism and disability services for over 25 years across a multitude of settings from early intervention, education, residential care, training. Um, and I also lectured on the Diploma in Autism Studies in UCC for 10 years. I'm a late identified autistic woman, mum to an autistic child who's also ADHD. And so I suppose this work is both professional but also very deeply personal. I run Laura Crowley Connect. My focus is on supporting autistic children, teens, adults, even families, and the professionals around them. And I suppose my work sits at the intersection between nervous system safety, lived experience, and practical supports that actually works in the real life.
That sounds like you're doing great work, Laura, and as you're quite busy.
I suppose, look, autism isn't my niche, it's my life. And even though I didn't know it for a long time, um, yeah, I live, breathe, enjoy autism.
Yes, I can certainly vouch for that myself. Starting us, so I know exactly how you would feel. But it sounds like you're doing amazing work, and it's just as we go on through through the podcast, hoping now the viewers will learn a good bit about. And feel free to ask, clarify, or
Okay.
anything throughout. So the second question is, what do you do as your job within the autism field?
I think that's a really interesting question because I have to ask myself. My job, I suppose, evolved over a number of years. I started in private practice 12, nearly 12 and a half years ago, and with a dream of supporting kids through the social minefields that the world presents are so confusing for our kids. So that was kind of my specialism per 12 and a half years ago. And it grew and evolved. And I think it grew and evolved as I grew and evolved in my practice, in my understanding, and then also in my own identification when I started understanding that my life was actually my struggles were the people that I was supporting struggles because I had always assumed that mine were just Lauraisms. They weren't autistic struggles, they were Lauraisms. So I never brought them to the table and associated them with the kids that I was working with. Um, but I think that my work has completely evolved. And now I support autistic individuals, their families, through consultations and training and advocacy. I deliver trainings to schools, professionals, organizations on autistic anxiety, burnout, emotion-based school avoidance, regulation, and just understanding autistic identity and the internalized experience of what the world has pathologized as an external presentation, um, which yeah, I'm really, really deeply passionate about. I specialize in autistic sleep because I had a little baby who just did not sleep, and I became obsessed with it. When you're sleep deprived, you become obsessed with sleep. So then I went back and I trained in sleep because I became so obsessed with it. So now I support families around autistic sleep, energy regulation, understanding behavior through a nervous system lens. And I think that's we constantly get caught up on that externalized presentation of behavior when what we really need to be doing is looking way under the surface and understanding things from an internal perspective.
From, as you've just mentioned there, that you've through like the nervous system, can you
Hmm.
explain that a wee bit more? Just
Yeah, I suppose when we see behaviors, we see the external presentation of them. We might see hitting, we might see um, so very physical behaviors, or we might see withdrawal, we might see depression, we might see, symptoms of anxiety, which are all very visible. But underneath the surface, what we're looking at deeply sensitive people who are living in environments that are not catering to their needs. And when I work with kids, I discuss the nervous system with them and I discuss how our nervous systems work. And what we know about the autistic or just even the autistic brain, is that it's 42% more active at all given times. Even when we sleep, the autistic brain is 42% more active. That's exhausting. Okay, so our nervous systems are already working so much harder than the general population. Then we have nervous systems that are incredibly sensitive. Our sensory systems are incredibly sensitive in environments that are so rich in stimulation, that my work is trying to figure out where in the environment we need to tweak, where in the environment we need to change in order to help our nervous system settle. Because at the crux of it is, if your nervous system isn't settled, you cannot function properly because you don't have access to your higher order thinking and all of those really, really complex things that we need in order to learn and function and interact and form good relationships. So I guess from my perspective, um, I like to teach kids about their nervous systems, about like the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system. One is about your rest and digest, which is your PNS system, which is where we're supposed to live the majority of our lives. And then our SNS, which is our sympathetic nervous system, which is where your fight, flight, freeze, fawn mode comes from, which is your stress response mode. And what
Yes.
we find is the majority of autistic people are living in what we would know as SNS dominance or sympathetic nervous system dominance. They were constantly on this high alert mode because our environments aren't suiting us. Um, so it's learning to recognize when you're in that SNS mode. It's learning ways to self-regulate, self-soothe, but it's also about advocacy and learning to self-advocate for the environment that you need, the tweaks you need, the alternative arrangements that you need. It's about giving the confidence as well to deliver the information and be heard and have people believe you is hugely important. So I guess when I talk about things through a nervous system lens, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about helping kids, helping individuals um, be seen for the three C's: the comfort, connection, and the communication that all results when we have a calm nervous system.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic, Laura, because from I'm just thinking of that as you're speaking from my own understand. From me, it's like if you're doing something at what you're doing, but if
Hmm.
everything around you's going busy and you're
Hmm.
trying to focus and trying to do something,
Hmm.
you're just like, that's going. I need
Hmm.
to get out
Yeah.
back into what you're doing because it's wild hard to get your flow back in when
Yeah.
everything's jumping around.
Yeah, and there's that really famous quote from Luke Bearden, Dr. Luke Bearden he's in Sheffield University, I think. But he says autism plus environment equals success. And I think it's the most simplistic equation, but it rings true in every setting. And people forget that our environment isn't just tables and chairs. It's the sensory rich environment, it's the people, it's the attitude, it's the accommodations, it's all of those things together. So when kids come into my office, now you can only see like a corner of my office in this view, but when kids come into my office, there's 7 different types of cushions. So if you don't like the cushion that's behind you, you choose a different one. There's fluffy cushions and flat cushions and soft cushions and textured cushions. And that was a purposeful choice. There's 4 different types of seating. You choose whatever you want. You can lie down, you can face the wall, you can rock, you can sit on the floor, you can lie on the floor, you can do whatever you want, right? So the lighting is all faces upwards so that it's not glaring at anybody. It hits the ceiling and spreads out. There's just lots and lots of tweaks to make sure that this is the most comfortable environment possible so that I can come at my work from a space where they feel that the environment suits them. And then I'll look at things like music. I'll always ask my clients, what music do you want? And we get very, very unusual requests sometimes. And I'm like, I'll go with it. It doesn't bother me. Um, but I put on music in the background so that we can kind of interrupt any rumination that's going on and that they can focus and be regulated by the sounds they hear. I have smells that go on in my office that are just constantly like just teetering away in the background. They're not overwhelming, but they just bring a constant smell rather than because I have a puppy that comes in and out with me that works. She's nearly 3 now. But I don't want smells to be competing with each other. I just want one kind of solid smell. So there's lots of
Yeah,
considerations before you ever get down to the nitty-gritty of any work. And that's my job is to make sure that I'm regulating their nervous system before I ever try and do any sort of work. Because the crux of it is when you're not regulated, when your nervous system isn't relaxed, when we're not in that PNS state of that parasympathetic nervous system of rest and digest, we don't learn. We don't have access to our higher order thinking. So that needs to be our predominant focus before we ever try and teach anything or dig deeper on any topic whatsoever.
yeah, that's perfect. Thank you for that there. So the third question is, can you tell me a little bit about how you came up about getting your own autism diagnosis and how it's changed your outlook in life?
Oh, okay. That's a story in itself. It's a really long story, and I'm going to try and shorten it because I told this story on another podcast and it took up about 10 minutes. The
I'll
long
take
and
your
the
time.
short of it is that I had always thought I was different. I had always felt that I had Laura-isms, as I said. I would have been quite self-deprecating in that I would have thought that I was very clumsy, I was very awkward, I was too sensitive. There was lots of words that I would have used, and there was lots of labels that were applied to me, and none of them really, really fit. I had floated the idea that I thought I was autistic about 10 years ago and had kind of confided in somebody, and they had said, no, there's no way you're autistic. Like you have friends, you make eye contact, you're not autistic. I'd always struggled with anxiety, and I'd now realized I had struggled hugely with depression, bouts of depression over the years. Roll on to having my second child, December 2018. And I had a breakdown then shortly after that, about 3 months after that. And I now recognize it as severe autistic burnout because I had a 19-month-old when I had my baby. And I just really wasn't coping. And I went on a journey of kind of self-discovery and figuring out, like, I really realized I didn't know anything about myself. And on that journey, then lockdown hit. Lockdown came along in March 2020, just as I was turning 40. And we were all at home with nobody to see and nobody to talk to. And my husband turned around to me and he said, "You love this. You were built for this." Because I was much more content when I didn't have the external pressures. And I started reading a book that was given to me, Jennifer Cook. She's an author. She's from, Love on the Spectrum on Netflix.
Yes, yes, I've watched that.
Jennifer is a very dear friend of mine. I love Jennifer. I met Jennifer through my work with a charity here in Cork about 14 years ago when she brought her entire family to Ireland to keynote. And I've met Jennifer a few times. Every time she comes to Ireland, we normally meet up. And on her last trip, which was February 2019, she had given me a copy of her book, Autism in Heels. So in the thick of lockdown, I finally read Autism in Heels, and I realized that she had been trying to tell me that I was autistic. I booked my appointment to see the psychologist in April and finally saw the psychologist on the 12th of August, 2020. And um, although I think my diagnosis or identification, as I prefer to say, came much later in life. I was 40 years old. It reframed everything. It was like I got glasses for the first time and could finally see the wood for the trees because my anxiety, my burnout, my sensory overwhelm, my exhaustion, they all suddenly looked completely different than what I had thought they were. And they made complete sense. So it replaced years of criticism with self-compassion. And I had actually studied self-compassion on a 2-day course with the creators of the self-compassion movement. Christopher Germer was over in Ireland in February of 2020, and I had done that course. And I think after my identification, I put that to use because I had spent so long shaming myself for all my difficulties. And the the antidote for that poisonous shame is self-compassion. So self-compassion kicked in and it's changed, my identification has changed how I parent, how I work, how kindly I treat myself, how I look at my own nervous system, how I look at my difficulties, how I compare myself. A comparison is the thief of joy. I no longer compare myself to my neurotypical or autistic friends. Their milestones as their milestones, mine will look different because I am different. And I think that has really created a sense of 2020 vision. So there's a really famous quote, and I think, oh, who's it by? And it says, "You only have two lives. The second one starts when you realize that you only have one." And
Heard
I
that
can't.
one.
Have you heard? It's like by Confucius, or I can't remember. Confucius. I can't say the name, but it's anyway. You only have two lives, and the second one begins when you realize you only have one. And I think that's when mine began. I think, I talk about my life post-identification being the most sound mentally I have ever felt in my entire life, the most real I've ever felt in my entire life. And I don't think I changed when I got my identification, but I think my understanding did. And as a result, everything did. I realized just that I wasn't broken. I was just autistic living in a
Did
world that
everything,
wasn't built for me.
sorry,
Pardon?
Jim, did everything just sort of click into place
Yeah,
after the diagnosis? And even though it was
yeah.
sort of back to normal, but
Yeah, and I think it took a few months. I always say that there's a grieving period that comes after you get an identification. I wasn't grieving the fact that I was autistic. What I think I did do though was look backwards with this crystal clear 2020 vision of, and it started with me as a small child, and I was getting flashbacks of things that happened, and just mourning the loss of understanding for that little girl, and then my teens and doing the same thing there, and just mourning the loss of certain experiences. Because had I understood myself and had I seen myself through an autistic lens, I think my life would have been very different. And obviously, the understanding wasn't there then. I was born in 1980. Ireland wasn't even aware what autism was. I mean, when I started working in autism, when it was like 1999 when I first started working with a little autistic boy in a preschool, and nobody knew what autism was, and the idea of it was just not comprehended at all. And my, I suppose, type of autism, and I hate using the word type, but my presentation would never have rung true in that environment at all. So there's a grieving that comes with it, but it's not a grieving of the identification. It's a grieving of the suffering that came without it.
yeah, thank you for that, Laura. Do you think it's important for more people to understand more about autism?
Yes. Yes, and I think this has been a really rough year for autism. Or sorry, last year was just an incredibly rough year. Look, I lectured on the history of autistic interventions and supports for 10 years. And they always say history repeats itself. I think we're gone backwards. I think we're gone so far backwards in what we're looking at. Now we're looking at cause again. We're talking about like all this stuff about like paracetamol or in
Yes,
pregnancy, and
yes,
it drives
aware
me
what you're chatting about.
insane, like it drives me absolutely nuts because we're focusing on the wrong area. We're
Yeah,
focusing, instead of focusing on the lived experience, we're trying to focus on something that isn't even a thing. Like when we're putting the blame on women who are trying to be the best people that they can be while carrying their kids, we're missing the point. We should be trying to put the emphasis on people living their best lives with
Yeah,
the neurology that they have. So,
that's exactly it. That they would want people to thrive, not
yes,
survive.
yes. And when we focus on blame, what we're actually doing is we're shifting the picture to create this idea of shame for being who we are, when that's we're gone backwards. We're way back to refrigerator mother theory of the 50s, where we were blaming mothers for being cold and callous, and that's where the autism came from. Kids were retreating into themselves. We're just rehashing old information, and I think that the focus really needs to be on autism as a lived internal experience, not as a checklist of behaviors. Um, and understanding that it's a dynamic experience, and what we're capable of on one day is not the same as what we're capable on another day, because there's so many interweaving factors, like our nervous system, our sensory system, our energy stores, and all those things, they all interweave to create what we can bring to any day. Our support needs change wildly according to day to day. And I think the miscomprehension that autism is an externally visible experience 100% of the time is so inaccurate and so damaging, because many autistic people look fine. And I put it in rabbit ears there because they're actually like swans. They're furiously paddling underneath to keep up. We need a world where somebody can visibly say, I need help, without the shame of it.
I definitely agree with that, Laura,
Yeah.
because even myself, when I'm chatting to people, and it's especially when I meet new people and I explain
Hmm.
to them, oh, I'm autistic, and it's like, you don't look it, you don't do this, you don't do that.
Yeah.
But
I
then,
always say I forgot my t-shirt. I forgot my
uh,
t-shirt. That's when I'm feeling smart. But I think, and people are well-meaning. And I always say this, when people, and you say it to people in conversation that you're autistic, I think the worst response I've had is somebody started speaking louder to me. It's like, I
seriously,
didn't I didn't say I'm hearing impaired. I
oh
said I'm
my,
autistic. They just started almost shouting at me, and I was like, why are they shouting at me? Now I am half deaf in one ear, but I was like, I didn't mention that I'm, half deaf in one ear. So I think people are well intentioned a lot of the time, and they don't know what to say, so they blurt out the thing that they see in pretty things on Pinterest, like, aren't we all a little bit autistic?
or what they see on TV and movies,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
that's not
and
the
they
case.
think it's the right thing to say. And I think when I first started telling people very openly that I'm autistic, I found it hard to challenge those like little sprinkles of like empathy that people were trying really hard to show. Now I've no problem when people say we're all a little bit autistic. My go-to is always the same thing. And when I say no, it's actually not. We're not all a little bit autistic. You're either autistic or you're not. And it's kind of like, if you've ever had backache and indigestion, does that make you a little bit pregnant? And the answer is absolutely not, and people are always like, well, no. And I'm like, well, exactly. You can't be a little bit autistic. You either are or you're not, just like you can't be a little bit pregnant. You either are or you're not. And when people say that, I know it comes from a place of kind of trying to smooth it over and trying to normalize what you've said. But what it actually does, I think, is it really minimizes your difficulties. I'm not entirely comfortable with that either, because while I am really loud and proud about being autistic, and I'm very um, focused on the positives that it brings to my life, it's not that I ignore the difficulties. I'm very, very aware of my difficulties and my daughter's difficulties. It's not easy being autistic in a non-autistic world. However, I live by the phrase, your brain believes what you repeat. And if I sit and repeat that autism is hard, autism will be really, really hard, because your brain doesn't believe what's true. Your brain believes what you repeat.
Yeah, so you would treat that as like as a positive mindset, what,
Yes,
but it
yeah,
will everything will have a chance and be positive if you reinforce it.
exactly. yeah, and I don't want to live in a negative space. If I focus on the negative, that's all I will see. If I can focus on the positives, particularly on the hard days, if I can find one positive, then that's what I'll choose to focus because having lived a life that was very heavily rooted in anxiety and depression, I'm now very aware that my mental mindset informs my reality. So I am very deeply passionate about what I feed my brain,
Yeah,
what I feed my brain being my reality. And I think I want people to know that there are absolutely challenging days. I will never deny it. There are days that I find incredibly hard, but you probably won't see that from me unless we sit down and have a really good chat because for me, mindset is very, very powerful. And that's where I choose to sit.
yeah.
Not every person's choice, but that's where I choose to sit.
Thanks for that, Laura. Have you, question five would be, what would be an ideal view for the future for autistic people?
Mm. Um, so I was sent for an ADHD assessment by my doctor publicly and rejected 3 times. And the rejection was because apparently my life wasn't falling apart enough. Now, they said it really nice way. Uh, but my dream for autistic people and ADHDers and just neurodivergent people in general is that we would live in a world where neurodivergent people don't have to earn support by falling apart.
Yeah, you're saying that's like getting them from the get-go, but not having,
But we shouldn't have to fall apart to get support. And
yeah,
unfortunately, we live in a society where it's he who shouts the loudest or he who, has the most needs get support. And I see this all the time. When I worked in a charity, I used to travel around to schools and support kids in classrooms. But I was called when tables and chairs were being thrown. I was never called when kids were just quiet and slightly withdrawn in the class. They weren't causing any issues, so they were overlooked for support. And my dream for this world is that support should be unilateral. And yes, obviously there are going to be harder days when we maybe need more support, but my dream would be that there would be unilateral support regardless of your current needs.
yes, and that's would be an ideal society, but there's always work to be done.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
yeah. So the final question here is: Have you any other things you would like to add, or have you even any questions you would like to ask me?
So I suppose I thought about this because I thought about this question, and there's a few things I would love. I would love people to listen more to autistic voices. Um, they need to be central, not optional. I mean, we really need to be listening because autism is a deeply internal experience. I also feel, though, that progress isn't about perfection. It never is. It's about safety, compassion, and curiosity. So we need to be thinking about progress for the autistic community in terms of that. How can we create safety? How can we increase our compassion? How can we be curious about that internal state and be respectful of the individual rather than creating policies that are talking about progress but are doing it without the autistic voice, without
Without the
curiosity?
action.
Yes. Um, And I think realistically, then, that neurodivergent people don't need to be changed. We need to be understood. We desperately need to be understood. And I worked in a field previously where it was about change and it was about suppressing stims and it was about all those things. And I look back and I have so much regret around, practices that were seen as best practice and that were thought as being the best option. Um, and but you know better, you do better. And I think one of the most valuable things you can do is say, we were wrong, let's move on. Um, and I think that's what we need to start doing and stop going backwards. Do you have any questions for you? Um, what would you say as an autistic person is your ultimate safety? What gives you the ultimate feeling of safety?
It's it's just it's whenever, I know this sounds a bit odd, but it's when everything's in
Nothing
control.
sounds odd. Nothing sounds odd.
Well, and if everything's in control and everything's working as it should be, and it's
Uh-huh.
just that there's no hiccups within
Uh-huh.
the day, but obviously that won't happen. But
It's a hard one to overcome,
yeah,
isn't
it is.
it?
It is.
And
But
one of my phrases is always control the controllables.
yeah,
So
but then
when hiccups do arise, I search for the controllable that I can control.
you can start that, but then you'll end up going and keep going and just go down a rabbit
Yeah,
hole.
but that's, you know what? Sometimes we need to go down the rabbit hole if it helps us feel safe. And it's sometimes when we get caught up in the things that are going wrong, we miss the things that are going right.
That's for sure. Thank
Yeah.
you.